Well, welcome along to the first episode in a series of deep dives here at TwinSpires that are designed to provide you with an inside track into becoming a more informed horse player. Andrew Brown with you alongside what is an esteemed panel of racing experts. Take a look at them, would you, folks? We've got Churchill Downs handicappers and on-air hosts Scott Shapiro and James Scully. Welcome along, gentlemen. And TwinSpires handicapper and editor at large, Ashley Anderson. Hi there, Ashley. In this episode, we're going to discuss everything you need to know about Brisnet Past Performances, or PPs, as they are known for short. James, let me ask you firstly. There's obviously plenty of different ways to find a winner in this beautiful sport that we all love, but how important are Brisnet PPs for you personally when you're assessing a race?
Well, they're extremely important. I mean, I think they're the best past performances out there, and I use them every time I handicap. I mean, there's a lot of elements to racing, a lot of different categories, distances, age groups, and I think the Brisnet Ultimate Past Performances bring together a wealth of information that applies to all circumstances, and just value-added information that is not available in other products, I think, is the real advantage to using the Brisnet Ultimate Past Performances.
Nice one. And Scott, you're on air sometimes for 6, 7, 8 hours at a stretch, broadcasting your analysis on races for the Churchill Downs simulcast. Could you do it without your Brisnet PPs?
No shot, Brownie. And I did not use Brisnet Past Performances through much of my handicapping days, but over the last 8 years or so, they've certainly been my go-to, and they make a world of difference, not only just for the historical information, but for the proprietary information that we'll talk about in here as well. Real easy to see the pace of the race based on the Brisnet Past Performances. I wouldn't leave home without them, Brownie.
Nice one. All right, well, let's get into some of the standout features of the Brisnet PPs. They are jam-packed with, as Scott just mentioned, their proprietary information, including the all-important Brisnet speed and pace ratings, which, Ashley, I know you are a massive fan of. So tell us, if you will, Ashley, what exactly are Brisnet speed and pace ratings, and how should we use them?
So if you're looking at the first page of a race in Brisnet's past performances, you'll see in the right-hand corner, there's a par winning figure. It's a speed figure for the race conditions that are in question. So for example, let's say it's a 6.5 furlong race. Par winning figure is a 97. I'll go through with each horse and I'll look at their most recent speed figure. If it's something around 97, I'm going to take note. I'll also look at their pace ratings. You have an E1, E2, and late pace rating. So that'll show you how fast a horse is running. Depending on the distance of the race, it'll show you how fast they're running at a specific point in that race. So if you've got a sprint and you've got a horse that's running a 103 E1 rating, take note in that, because they're probably going to come out front in a sprint and potentially go gate to wire. So I look at those numbers, and helpful in, finding which horse is coming in great form. I look at the highest last race speed rating and the best speed rating at today's distance when I'm comparing horses in a field.
Nice one, Ashley. So, I mean, a lot of our players are quite familiar with, say, the category of 3-year-old males, for example. What would some typical speed ratings be that we might see for that category of 3-year-old males?
Well, I might want to defer to Scott and James because they've been doing this a little bit longer than me. What do you think, James and Scott? I feel like, it differs a lot for types of races.
For the pars, for the speed pars, Brownie, I would say generally, like in maiden races, you're looking at 3-year-old maiden races, you're looking at like around in low 80s, perhaps might be a solid par, maybe even if it's a 2-year-old race in the 70s. But once you get to like stakes level, listed stakes, graded stakes, those numbers are going to clearly be in the 90s. And they'll, like a grade 1 3-year-old stake should definitely be a triple digit number, like Ashley referenced in the Derby. That Derby winner typically earns a triple digit. And I think the par for that race is at least like a 103 or 104. So it depends on the category, but you're looking at stakes races. They're going to generally be at least the mid 90s. And perhaps even higher for grade 1 events.
James, what is the fastest, and not to put you on the spot here, but I'm confident, what is the fastest Brisnet speed rating for a Kentucky Derby winner?
That's going to be like over 110, but I'm not exactly sure, Scott, the highest number. I was waiting for the Arrogate question, like who's earned the highest Brisnet speed rating of all time, Arrogate in the 2017 Travers. But yeah, I'm not sure of the high, but it's definitely going to be like in the 115 range, I believe, Scott.
And what was that figure from Arrogate, James? Don't keep us guessing.
126, I believe, was the number.
Wow.
So yeah. So generally, you get to 110, you're like great, those are like real quality grade 1 types. Anything above 100 is pretty much typically stakes quality. You'll see some allowance races will come up deeper and they might get low 100s. But it's just you're going to be basically, maiden races are going to be much lower. Horses typically, as they get experience, their numbers continue to increase as they get mature and develop in their racing career. So, I would say for like low level claimant races at the very bottom at smaller tracks, they could even be in like the upper 60s because those numbers will be much lower.
Gotcha. If we're comparing the speed ratings of different horses in a race, how many points generally might say equate to a length?
Is that
Is that too tough a question?
I generally have a I think it's different for sprints and routes. I think generally in a route a length might be could be more than a point, but generally, like a length or less, it's about a point difference typically. If horses are separated by a nose, a head, or a neck, quite often you'll see them both get the same number. And one thing you got to realize about the speed ratings is they're published to the whole number, but the computer is actually generating them to tenths. So theoretically, you got a horse get a 110.1, another horse get a 110.5. You're not going to see that. We're going to keep it like round numbers.
Scott, I know you like to use the pars that we've mentioned. Where do we find them on the Brisnet PPs, and how should they be used?
Yeah, the pars are in the upper right-hand corner of your past performances. You'll see the E1, E2, et cetera, late, and then the speed at the end. One thing you want to do is get a gauge quickly by looking at the pars to how high quality in terms of this condition the field is. If you see an 81 for the par speed and every horse in the field was running in the mid 70s on average at the same distance over the last 5 races, then it kind of tells you that it's a weak race for the level. So maybe you want to consider looking for a class dropper that's going to get even more class relief than it might look on paper, or the race might just be a little bit slower than the normal race for the level. But looking up there in the upper right-hand corner of your past performances is going to give you a really good idea, good starting point on what to look for in a winner or a typical winner at this level.
That's great. Is there anything else we should know about Brisnet's speed and or pace ratings before we move on?
One thing I just wanted to add, Brownie, that I think a lot of not necessarily all beginner or intermediate, some advanced horse players that are learning new numbers might not look at is, remember, these are numbers for particular distances and particular surfaces. So if a horse is running consistent 81s going 6, 5.5, 6.5 furlongs on the dirt, then those numbers matter. But if they're doing, running those numbers on the turf, going 2 turns, and then they come in to a dirt race for the first time, that number is hard to trust. So there are definitely different places and times when you can trust the numbers more. And I think they're most reliable when you're looking at the same surface and distance.
Great stuff. Good advice there from Shap. Some little tricks of the trade when you're looking at those Brisnet speed and pace ratings. Another Brisnet proprietary figure that is extremely popular with horse players is the prime power rating, which can be found alongside a horse's lifetime start statistics and also in the race summary at the bottom of each race. This figure actually takes into account the Brisnet speed figure among other factors. James, what can you tell us about the prime power?
Well, I mean, the prime power, it combines the Brisnet speed, pace, class, how the horses finish. It combines a bunch of different factors into one number. The higher, the better. And that number is for that horse in today's race. So You're going to have on the ultimate past performances, next to each horse is pedigree stuff at the top of the page. For each horse, you're going to have a prime power number. It lists the number, plus in parentheses, it shows that horse's ranking in the field. And then in the summary, we list them in order as well. So it's like we like to say, it's our most powerful number because it combines so many different factors, and the higher the better. So it's a great tool for utilizing. One thing about it is you can also gauge like a point difference. Like a point difference in prime power might not be much, but we'll see some races where horses have a 2 or 3 point advantage, and the percentages just get higher for their win rate based on the prime power difference.
Nice one. Shap, don't mean to put you on the spot here, but any real life examples that you can provide us of where prime power has identified a winner in the past?
Yeah, actually thinking back to the 2018 Belmont Stakes, I remember Justify was making his quest for the Triple Crown, and going into that race, of course, he had knocked off both the Derby and the Preakness. And you're wondering, how much does he stand out? Because he's going to be odds on in this spot, going to get way potentially over bet if he's beatable. And then you look at the prime power number, and I think the separation, speaking to James' point, was well over 20 points. He just towered over that field. So made myself a lot more confident when singling him in the horizontal wagers that day. Obviously, short price, don't want to single those all the time, but on big days, find your separators in other parts of the sequence. And I've often used the prime power for that. And you'll hear Joe Christofek and myself talk about these on the Churchill Downs feed every day. Those are the ones that were the most provide the most separation from their opponents. That's why they're listed on there. So yeah, Justify and the Belmont's the example that comes to mind, Brownie.
No, yes. And Ashley, as I mentioned before, the prime power actually includes some of those Brisnet speed ratings in its formula. Is this a number that you use when you're handicapping? And if so, how do you use it?
Yeah, I'll definitely take a look at it, because you'll see there's the 4 boxes at the top of the page at the beginning of each race. And I'll take note if there's a significant difference between the first and second horse, especially if it's 5 to 10 points. I'll definitely keep an eye as I'm going through with all of the speed ratings. And if I feel like this horse does stand out and has that 5 or 10 point differential in prime power, then I feel even more confident this is a horse I should back. But I also would say you have to be careful too. You might find a horse that has the highest prime power, but they've been running on dirt, and maybe this is a turf race. So sometimes that can skew prime power rankings. So definitely watch out for that, depending on what surface they're running, and look at how each horse, or what surface each horse has been running, because that can factor into prime power. And maybe a horse that looks good on paper isn't quite as good in this race. But generally, if it's a dirt race and there's a major point differential and all those horses are running the same surface, I'm going to say, I think the stats say actually that if there's a difference of 10 points, that normally that top horse wins about 55% of the time. James, you might want to correct me on that. I know I saw that in a Brisnet article in the past, and I think this data was from a couple of years ago. So I don't know if that's changed at all, but I believe it is about 55% if there's that big of a difference in the first and second horse.
That sounds correct to me. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but yeah, it's like, I do believe 55% of the time for a 10 point difference. It's pretty rare you see that, and that horse is typically going to just lay over the competition.
Even better if it's at some decent odds as well. I would imagine if you're going to see a horse with that kind of differential at the top of a prime power, 10 points or more clear of the next best, it's probably going to identify a favorite. Would that be right, guys?
Yeah, that's the one thing with prime power, is it's good for separating horses, good for kind of determining maybe shorter price horses that you're either for or against, and it will help you with that. But you're not going to get a ton of value from the prime power. And that makes sense, Brownie, because you're incorporating so much data into a given number that kind of brings everything into the mix. So if you're looking at long shots, oftentimes you're finding 1 or 2 little reasons why they have a chance. But when you incorporate all the data together, it's almost always going to lead you to one of the favorites. And that's kind of what the prime power does. Nothing wrong with that, but just if you're seeking long shots, prime power probably isn't the best number.
Nothing wrong with that if they're winning at a clip of 55%, as Ashley just pointed out. Is there anything else, any other tricks or traps perhaps that we might need to know about prime power figures before we move on?
I think
I mean-
Ashley said it best with when it terms just be careful of the surfaces and whatnot horses are racing over. But I'll throw it to you, James, if you had anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's also, I mean, one thing to always keep in mind when handicapping is you might be looking for reasons to take a shot against a favorite. So, perhaps the prime power can help you identify a horse who you think might be vulnerable at a short odds in this spot. It works both ways, and as far as identifying horses you want to bet and perhaps horses you want to play against.
Fantastic stuff. All right, well, let's talk about class ratings. We'll move in and talk about another important feature in the Brisnet PPs. You'll find them labeled as CR, Charlie Romeo, after the race type, and they indicate how well a horse has performed against similar competition to what they are facing today. James, could you give us an example of how we might use that information?
Sure. I mean, I think the class ratings have value on turf. And I mean, one circumstance that American racing fans run into quite often nowadays in stakes races is we have these European horses shipping in. And from most European countries, we're going to have a race rating and a class rating. And to me, I mean, basically, dirt and the race and class, the race rating and class ratings are still going to provide a gauge for dirt races. But the dynamics on dirt, where pace makes the race, makes it the horses are running hard from the start, is a little bit different from turf racing, especially turf routes. And I find the class ratings have real value for analyzing turf horses that might have an advantage over their competition today. And like I referenced before, you get the Breeders' Cup. It's very valuable to have a gauge on how these horses have been running from overseas in terms of class. Unless you follow it, you're not going to have a good understanding of that in most situations.
James, you just mentioned their class ratings and race ratings. How do they differ, those two?
Race ratings to take a look at the entire field. That you're giving one number that is a general class number for the entire field. The CR, the class rating, measures individual performance. So a horse that runs generally mid-pack is going to typically, you might be close to the mean with the race rating. But, we'll see lots of examples. A race might have a 112 race rating. The winner might run a 115 class rating per se. So the class rating is measuring the performance of the horse in the races. And one thing about the race and class ratings, those numbers aren't static. I mean, they're static for today's race, but they're going to continue to change as these horses move forward. And so you'll see a horse that comes back, is running today. You get one group of horses in a 2-year-old races, the race ratings will be lower. That same field could come back races later and the race rating will be higher because those numbers are constantly being updated based upon performance.
I think that's a very good thing to have because obviously as we learn more, get more information, horses run more races, we can fine tune those numbers. So if we're not fine tuning them, we're kind of, I don't want to say committing a crime, but that's the best thing that comes to mind right now. But you got to continue to evaluate races, whether you're looking at the numbers on the Brisnet PPs or looking at the running lines and kind of know the horses, you're kind of doing the same exercise. The number just makes it easier for you.
Yeah, some more important information there too in terms of improving your handicapping skills. Often the class ratings, there's some great information there from Shap and Scully as we move on now and have a look at sort of the trainer stats and the jockey stats section. We've all heard the term horses for courses, and of course that can also apply to the jockeys and trainers. That information about how they're performing at a particular track and a whole lot more is available on the Brisnet PPs. Ashley, I know this is another section that you take note of quite a lot. What do you tend to look for in the trainer and jockey stats? What information is there available for us in the Brisnet PPs?
So the thing I like about Brisnet PPs, as opposed to if you have just a regular race program at a particular track, you're going to have a lot more stats about how trainers and jockeys are doing in these specific race conditions. In a regular race program, you might see how a jockey's doing at that particular meet, but you can get a lot more information. For example, it'll show you in Brisnet that a jockey and a trainer combined, they'll tell you what their record is over the last 60 days. You can also see the win percentage of a jockey when they're in a sprint versus a route distance. And with trainers, you might get a stat like this trainer strikes 23% of the time second off the layoff, or when dropping from maiden special weight to a maiden claimer. So if I'm, especially in races like maiden special weights or maiden claimers, which are a little more difficult because you don't have a lot of race information for each horse, I'll look at trainer stats, and that can help you pinpoint a winner, especially when a horse hasn't run many races or no races at all.
Yeah, terrific stuff, gentlemen. Anything you'd want to add to the jockey and trainer stats section?
I think one thing that I want to add is, a lot of these stats have to do with intent, and that's what's most meaningful to me about trainer stats. First-time starters, probably the best example. You see women, 20, 22, 25%. They're showing a true intent to have their horses ready to break from the gate and win at first asking. Other trainers come to mind that win a lot of races, but are just 2, 3, 4% with their first-time starters. They have the opposite intent. And one stat that I really particularly like on Brisnet Past Performances, you see first off claim stats quite a bit throughout whatever you're using, but the second off the claim stat is one that really isn't used all that much, and I'll tell you why I like it real quickly. First off the claim, you're often claiming a horse and you get what you get. You might wheel them back in a week, it might be 3 weeks, but you're learning the horse. But the best horsemen to me get one race in the horse they've had around the barn for a few weeks. Now, what are they going to do with the horse? They're going to cut back. They're going to make an equipment change. They're going to stretch out, whatever it might be as they learn it. And if you look, a lot of the best trainers are better second off the claim than first off the claim.
James, anything you want to add, trainer jockey stats?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll echo what Scott said. I mean, even like second off the layoff, you're going to get specialized stats that could be applicable to today's situation. Some trainers just do better with the second start back. So I love the grass. I love the sprint to route to sprint. Those numbers have at value when I'm handicapping. And yeah, I mean, the trainer stats, are fantastic. You're going to get both you're going to get the trainer's numbers for the year, and then you're going to get 3 categories that apply to the trainer in today's race condition.
Shap mentioned first-time starters, and another important section of the Brisnet PPs that can help you with first-time starters is the pedigree ratings. James, being the massive stud that you are, I know that this is a section that you're very interested in as well. How important are the pedigree ratings, and how do you use them?
Well, I'm going to use those for horses that are definitely maiden races. Generally, 2-year-old maiden races. You're going to get these advanced pedigree stats on every 2-year-old race, every maiden race. You'll even get stats for turf races relative to the horses, dam and sire. Just going through the stats that are available, we have average winning distance for sire and the broodmare sire. That comes into play perhaps when a horse is trying to route the first time, whether they have like a lot of speed in their pedigree. You're going to get mud numbers. For me, like mud numbers, first out win numbers, all those are relative to first time a horse does it. Once they've done it, you've got experience to call upon, and you can make your own judgment how they're going to handle it. But first time on the grass, first time on the mud, first time starter, all those numbers have value because, as Scott pointed out, some trainers or some sires, some trainers might be real low, like less than 10%. Others can be 20% or higher. So there is a big difference. And along those lines, you're going to get you're going to get the number of starters a dam has had, the number of winners it's produced, the number of stakes winners. Those really have value in 2-year-old races to me, as well as the number of turf winners a dam has produced. Love looking at that number when a horse is trying the turf for the first time. Other numbers as well are first out win percentage, first out turf win percentage, and an standard SPI, which is a sire production index, which basically just says overall number, whether the sire is successful or not. And the gauge for that is really 1.0. 1.0 is generally considered to be a average, middle of the road number. And anything higher than 1.0 means that horse does well with his offspring. Anything lower tends to be a negative.
In the same section, there's a lot of information there too around sales, the sales data. James, I know you're also keen on your sales data. What's included in the Brisnet PPs as far as that is concerned, and what can you garner from that information other than I certainly need to make sure I'm backing a few more winners before I can afford to buy one of these horses?
Yeah, well, every horse, they're going to have their sales data right above the sire, right in the middle at the top of their past performance for each horse. But in maiden races, over on the far hand right side, it's going to give you more data. It's going to say sold at. It's going to list the sale, the year, the price it sold for, and then it's going to give you a ranking for the sire. So, for example, a popular commercial sire like Into Mischief might have 70, 80, 100 horses sell during the course of a year, weanlings, 2-year-olds, and yearlings. And it's going to rank those horses. And typically the higher a horse sells, and I mentioned Into Mischief, but where it really has value to me, Andrew, is when you have a lesser sire that perhaps isn't as well known. I see that this sire has like 20 horses that sold at auction last year or the year before, and this was the number one seller. This horse had something going for him at the time that might be able to translate to racing first time out today. So yeah, those sires, those pedigree, the sales information numbers have value, and you also see what the sire's average sales price is, so you can gauge that as well.
So much information, and another great feature of the Brisnet PPs designed to give the handicapper an edge is information around track bias as well. Scott, what can you tell us about track bias?
Well, track bias can be extremely informative before you make your decisions. You could pick up your past performances, do all the work, but if the racetrack is playing towards speed, or if it's impossible to wire out a field, everything's from coming out the back, then a lot of the handicapping goes out the window. You can oftentimes cost more than half the field. The Ellis Park meet over the last few weeks is one track that definitely has had biases. It's been very tough to come from off the pace. It's been very tough to come from the outside. You want to be along the inside. So having that sort of information is certainly going to make things easier. And James, I know Brisnet has a real good way of helping organize that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. Basically, our track bias stats that are at the end of each race and ultimate past performances will break down, by distance, 6 furlong races, mile and eighth races. At the very least, it's going to say routes or sprints, and it gives the numbers for the last 7 days, and then for the entire meet. So you can get a quick glance at how the track's been playing in the last 7 days. And for the entire meet, it's going to break it down by run styles. We classify horses into 4 run styles: early pressers, which are stalkers, and sustained S types, which are one-run closers. You're going to be able to see a quick summary of how each of those types are faring over the last weekend for the meet. And then we're going to break down some post-position stat numbers as well. So it's a great, like Scott said, it's a great tool to take a quick look at and see if there's any prevailing bias going on at this distance, at this track presently.
Nice. So there is obviously a wealth of information that we've gone over, a lot of it here in the last sort of few minutes talking about the Brisnet PPs. If there was only one thing that you could look at in the Brisnet PPs, guys, just one, what would it be? James, let me start with you.
Well, I mean, I'm going to focus on the speed ratings. If I just had one thing, I generally, when I break down a race, I'm just looking at recent form. I think that's more important than past races. And I'm looking at speed ratings. And that's going to be my first look every time I look at a race. I can always come back and gauge pace and everything else. But yeah, the Brisnet speed ratings would be the one thing that I love the most.
How about you, Scott?
For me, it's going to be the pace ratings. When I first start handicapping a race, I want to look at the favorite, but to even get a gauge on what my assessment is of the favorite, I need to know how fast or how not fast the early pace is going to be. And the E1 rating, particularly E2 as well, gives me a good gauge how many horses are going to be competitive up front. Maybe there's a horse or two that looks good on paper that looks like he or she might be on the lead, but if you look a little bit closer, they're not fast enough to make the lead. And when they don't make the lead, they don't win. So there's potentially could be a toss. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, Brownie, you could have a horse that's just faster than the others, even though when you look at the running lines, they all look like they want to be involved early on. So to me, the pace ratings are the first must on Brisnet PPs.
Ashley, I feel like you're going to make it a clean sweep for the speed or pace ratings.
I was going to go with the race ratings since Scott loves that so much, but I'm just kidding. I would say speed. You know, if I see a horse that has a significantly higher speed rating than every other horse, of course, it makes a difference if they were running a sprint versus a route, but that's where those pace ratings come in too. If a horse is cutting back in distance, but had high 90s or triple digit E1 or E2 ratings, then even if it faded at the finish in a route and it's cutting back to a sprint, then I'm going to take note of that and, you know, probably back that horse, especially if it's at good odds, cutting back in distance.
Okay, well, it's now your time to gloat. How have you used the Brisnet PPs in the past, each of you, a real life story here, to make a ton of money? Tell us your best betting story where the Brisnet PPs have helped you. Ashley, why don't we start with you?
I don't know if it's my best, but a recent example, I would say in the Keeneland spring meet, you know, I was handicapping every race in that meet, and I had one hit that I was pretty happy with in a maiden claimer, a 12-1 horse that came through for me. And this was one of those instances where trainer stats really played and factored in for me, because if you compared the whole field, you had a lot of trainer stats that were maybe a little bit weaker. And the horse that I ended up backing at 12-1, I felt, you know, this trainer, I had, you know, 19% win rate at the maiden claiming level. I factored that in. It had Luis Saez picking up the mount. He was winning at a 20% rate at the time before this race went off. And I looked at class rating as well. This horse had a 106 class rating and finished in 6th last out, but factoring in, you know, the other horses in their recent class ratings, I was able to pinpoint, even at 12-1, I think this horse is going to come into this maiden claimer and win based off of how his trainer performs, his new jockey, and his class rating in his 2 previous races.
Well done. And I heard you had $1,000 on it as well. So congratulations there. Ashley, what about you, Shappa?
Yeah, I don't have a specific example at hand like Ashley, so I won't have the jockey example to give. But when it comes to some big hits, I'm going to go back to the Ellis meet this most recently, where speed was very good. And admittedly, I can be stubborn playing the races. Yeah, shocker, a stubborn horse player. But at Ellis, the first week or two, really struggled to come up with the right horse that was going to be on the lead. Kind of wanted to keep going back to horses that I thought could come from off the pace, even though I knew the biased information was there and the E1 information was there as well. Over the last week or two of the Ellis meet, I have had come up with some 4 5-1 type horses that were the best, were the fastest with those E1 ratings, with those queer and sport speed ratings that have allowed me to unlock horses that were going to be in a prominent spot to take advantage of the bias, and have led me to a couple of good hits over the last couple of weeks at Ellis. So no specific story. I'll save that for another time, Brownie, when I have a better example or more specific things to cite. But just using those speed ratings, those pace ratings, once again, has proved to be a good move for me, not only in the past, but in the current.
Thank you, Shap. I look forward to hearing a more specific example soon, but that'll do. That's a pass from you. Thank you very much. And over to you, to the man that's hit the superfecta in the last 17 Kentucky Derbies. James.
Yeah, I'm going to spotlight a horse at Keeneland, just like Ashley did. And this is a horse to me last year in the Grade 2 Phoenix last fall at Keeneland. I took a look at that stakes race, and I was looking at Manny Waugh. And here's a horse that had not won his 2 previous starts, but his pace numbers showed me all I needed to see about him. He had been earning late pace numbers in the 70s, low 80s, and he started turning things around for Wayne Catalano without winning, and the numbers showed it right on paper. 2 starts back, he had run second, and he had gotten a 96 late pace number. And then he was coming off of, like, when I went back and watched the replay, I just submitted it because I thought it was troubled effort, but it was a close 4th at Churchill Downs. He got a 96 E2, a 97 LP. I knew that horse was coming back into form, and figured he'd get the right trip at Keeneland. And at 17-1, that was a good hit that I could contribute directly towards our pace numbers. And, like I said, a lot of times you'll see a horse that has something going for it, but everybody can see it. It's those examples where you can sort of find it where it's not obvious, that I think provide an opportunity for a big hit sometimes.
Thank you, James. And maybe we'll do a separate video about your Kentucky Derby superfecta victories some other time as well. Well, guys, thank you so much for this. It's all been incredibly insightful and interesting information about the Brisnet PPs. I think you're all welcome back for the next video if you'd like to come back. But yeah, so we'll see you next time. Of course, Brisnet PPs are available, of course, to view via the TwinSpires app or desktop, or by visiting, of course, brisnet.com. Thank you for watching. We'll see you on our next topic very soon, right here at TwinSpires.